The lamps along Officers' Row threw rectangles of light across the parade ground while Wind Off the River tugged at the flags. A sentry heard hoofbeats and braced before two riders clattered through the gate, white with dust and too tired to dismount at the post. One pulled off his hat and said only that the column was gone. The words hit the yard like a dropped crate. Inside headquarters, the telegraph began to chatter. The surgeon lit more lamps in the hospital, and the quartermaster sent men to the wharf. Before dawn, scouts slid a small boat to the dock with the first proof. They carried a silence that made troopers look away. On a crate by the pier, they set a pair of cavalry boots darkened to the soles. The officer on duty took them like they were hot and set them down again. By midday, fragments of the story had settled into something blunt. The fight was lost, the commander dead with most of his officers, and the wounded scattered along a river no one loved. Orders kept the fort upright. Companies were drawn up and told the truth. The band played nothing. Families stood in doorways with hands at their throats and watched the procession of stretchers as if looking too hard might break them. At dusk, the lamps went out one by one and left the buildings to the wind. That night, the sentry by the North Barracks heard boot heels where there was no patrol. They crossed the boardwalk, turned as if on command, and paced away. He called a challenge and got the steady breath of the prairie for an answer. The quartermaster locked the commander's house and took the key to the safe. The orderly who helped said the back stair creaked under a slow tread, pausing on the landing before descending again, like a man walking off a decision. He kept that to himself until the laundress downstairs asked who had been up there after dark. She had heard it too. Wounded finally arrived, sunburned, scabbed, wrapped in shirts cut to bandages, eyes like they had forgotten sleep. The hospital reeked of carbolic and boiled linen. A trooper named Fallon woke from fever and asked who had taken to practicing the bugle at midnight. Not a call, he said, just 3 clean notes near the corral. The surgeon told him fevers talk. Fallon said he knew fevers. This was a man. Routine kept the place from going to pieces. Fatigue details stacked unused ammunition. A company clerk wrote letters for men who could not bring themselves to start. On wash day, the line by the river carried shirts whose owners would not return. When the bandmaster tried a march for the first time since the news, even the horses turned their heads toward the sound and then away. One afternoon, the post carpenter went to fix a loose plank in the second barracks. He worked with the door open because the air inside was stale as a trunk. From the squad room, he heard a mess tin rattle, then slow steps crossing the floor, heel and toe. He stepped in. The bunks were made and the lockers shut. Dust hung in the light. He said out loud that he had work and returned to his plank. The board under his boots took one more footfall than he made. The town downriver heard the stories by Sunday. People carried food up the hill for the families who stayed. A reporter arrived with a satchel and questions about orders and blame. He also asked whether anyone had heard footsteps in empty rooms. The adjutant told him that grief has noises of its own and to write about the men who had not come back. The reporter stayed a week and left with a dispatch that put numbers and names on the page, but saved a paragraph for the boots on the boardwalk that nobody would claim. Winter pressed the buildings flat and drew frost up the window panes. A corporal on fire call crossed the parade before dawn and saw a figure at the ridge of the first barracks where the chimney met the roof. He started to hail and stopped. The figure turned its head like a man listening to a room below him, then seemed to step back into the blank behind the eave. When the corporal told the sergeant of the guard, the sergeant suggested less coffee at night. The corporal said he would try and did not. By spring, the post looked like itself again only from a distance. Up close, it wore grief like a garment. The replacement bugler played the book by the clock and did not decorate a single call. One night, he swore a second horn answered from the riverbank, 3 notes clean and clipped. He went down with a lantern and found only willow shadows and water. The next morning, he left a mute gift at the chapel door and asked no more questions of the dark. A few men returned late, staggering in with the last detachments of wounded. One who had been captured and released stood for a long minute on the commander's porch with his hand flat against the doorframe as if checking plumb. He said nothing about spirits. That night the sentry at the back gate heard 2 sets of steps cross the empty yard together, out of time with each other and yet in agreement, the way men walk when they have marched too long to notice their feet. Orders to reduce the garrison arrived with a wax seal that broke cleanly. Furniture was sold. The sutlers' shelves thinned. Surplus bed frames were stacked in the yard for auction, and wagons carried away more memories than wood. The hospital's last cases limped out with canes and stiff shoulders. In the hollow left behind, the small sounds continued. Boots pacing, chairs scraping, a door that shut though the window was open. The men who stayed said the place sounded busiest when it was most empty. When the army's work moved farther west, the fort sagged into a caretaker's routine. Roofs failed, porches leaned, and the steady tread gave way to insects and old nails moving with heat. Settlers pulled boards for barns and kitchens. The commander's house lost its windows, and then its second story. The chapel yielded to weather. Even so, on still evenings a walker on the bluff might pause and swear he heard measured steps, where nothing heavier than a swallow had landed all day. Years later, reconstruction crews came with plans, photographs, and fragments saved in closets. A park man traced the line of the old stair on a drawing and said the landing would feel right again once the wall returned. Locals brought lunches and stories. A carpenter from town said his grandfather had worked the wood here and had always claimed the parade ground keeps time. If you face the officers' houses in the blue hour, he said, you will hear a short march along the boardwalk, heel, toe, turn, heel, and gone. A ranger learned the rhythms of keys and latches and how to close a place without carrying yesterday into today. Still, sometimes after locking the commander's house, he would cross the parade and hear inside a measured walk, the length of a room and back again, as if someone were checking beds. He would wait for it to stop, and it always did, right where the old landing would be. He came to think it wasn't performance. It was habit continuing because no order had canceled it. If the fort holds ghosts, they are not theatrical. They do not throw dishes or moan. They wear out floors with the same steps they wore into them when the post was new. They climb the back stair, pause at the landing, and change nothing at all. They answer a bugle with 3 notes because that is what hands remember when the mouth does not want to play. They keep pace, and on nights when wind slides down the river and across the parade at just the right angle, anyone standing there can hear, as clearly as drill, that the post keeps time. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.